It was still dark outside Florida State Prison when the crowds began to gather. They came with signs, they came with banners, some came with bottles. And they were not there to mourn, they were there to celebrate. By morning, over 2,000 people would be standing outside those prison walls, cheering, chanting, setting off fireworks, all waiting for one man to die. His name was Ted Bundy, and inside that prison, with less than 24 hours left to live, he was making a decision that would shock even the detectives who had hunted him for years. He was finally going to tell the truth. Before we talk about his final hours, you need to understand why this execution was unlike any other in American history. Ted Bundy was not an ordinary killer. He was handsome, educated, charming. He had studied law. He had worked on a political campaign. He had counselled women at a suicide hotline. People liked him. People trusted him. And between 1974 and 1978, across at least 6 American states, he used that trust to murder at least 30 women and girls. Some investigators believe the true number was far higher, possibly over 100. He escaped from prison twice. He represented himself in his own murder trial. He smiled at cameras. He proposed marriage to a woman in the middle of his own courtroom proceedings, and she accepted. And now, after over a decade on death row in Florida, after every appeal had failed, after every delay had run out, January 24th, 1989 had arrived. The state of Florida was going to execute Ted Bundy at 7 in the morning, and he had one night left. The day before his execution, January 23rd, Ted Bundy agreed to an interview. The man who came to sit with him was Dr. James Dobson, a Christian psychologist and founder of a ministry called Focus on the Family. Dobson had requested the meeting, and Bundy, who had refused so many interview requests over the years, said yes. The interview took place inside the prison. Bundy was calm, measured. He looked directly at the camera, and then he said something that would be replayed on news channels around the world for decades. He blamed pornography. "I've met a lot of men," Bundy said, "who were motivated to commit violence just like me, and without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography." Detectives watching the tape rolled their eyes. Victims' families were furious. Experts called it what it almost certainly was, a final attempt by a manipulator to craft his own legacy, to shift responsibility, to go out on his own terms. But here is what made the interview genuinely significant, underneath all of that. Between the rehearsed statement and the deflections, Bundy said something else. He admitted that whatever he had become, he had chosen it, step by step, decision by decision. And he confirmed, for the first time on camera, that the murders were real, that he had done them, that the families deserved to know. For the detectives who had spent years building cases against a man who never fully admitted anything, it was the closest thing to a confession they would ever get on film. The interview lasted approximately 2 hours. When it was over, Bundy was taken back to his cell. He had less than 17 hours to live. That evening, Bundy made a series of phone calls. He spoke with his mother, Louise Bundy, who had stood by him through everything, through the trials, through the appeals, through years of denial. Louise had refused to believe her son was capable of what he had been convicted of. Whether she believed it by the end, no one knows for certain, but she spoke to him that night, and by all accounts, the call lasted a long time. He spoke with his attorneys. He spoke with a minister who prayed with him in his cell. What he did not do was spend those final hours making more confessions to investigators, at least not willingly. In the weeks leading up to the execution, detectives from multiple states had visited Bundy on death row, desperate to close cold cases. He had been dangling confessions like a man buying time, giving just enough information to keep investigators coming back, hoping each new detail might convince the governor to delay the execution. It had not worked. Now, with the morning approaching and no more leverage left, Bundy settled into something quieter. Guards who were present that night described him as composed. Not broken, not remorseful in any visible way. Composed. He ate his final meal: steak, eggs, hash browns, toast, juice, coffee. He ate most of it. At some point in those final hours, the man who had terrorized 6 states, who had escaped from custody twice, who had charmed juries and manipulated investigators for over a decade, simply went to sleep. Outside the prison, the crowds grew larger. At 5:30 in the morning, Ted Bundy was woken up. He was offered the chance to make a final statement. He chose to keep it short. "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." That was it. No dramatic speech, no final admission, no naming of victims whose families were still waiting for answers. Just 11 words, delivered quietly, and then silence. At approximately 7 in the morning, he was walked to the execution chamber. The chair they used had a name. Florida's inmates called it Old Sparky, a wooden electric chair that had been in use since 1923. Bundy was strapped in, electrodes were attached, a mask was placed over his face. At 7:16 a.m. on January 24th, 1989, Ted Bundy was pronounced dead. The official cause of death: electrocution. Outside the prison, the reaction was immediate. The crowd erupted. People who had been standing in the cold since the middle of the night cheered, screamed, embraced strangers, set off fireworks. One man held up a sign that read, "Burn Bundy, burn." Local restaurants had set up barbecues in the car park. Someone brought a hearse with a dummy in it dressed as Bundy. In 30 years of covering crime in America, journalists who were there that morning said they had never seen anything like it. In his final weeks, Ted Bundy had confessed to 30 murders across 7 states. Detectives believed the real number was higher. Some estimates put it closer to 100. The exact figure may never be known, because the only man who knew it was dead before he could be fully pressed. Several families never received answers. Several cases remain officially unsolved to this day. In 2011, the FBI launched what became known as the Bundy Project, a years-long effort to match Bundy to unsolved murders in states he had travelled through. New victims were identified, cold cases were reconsidered. Even decades after his execution, Ted Bundy was still reaching forward from death row. But perhaps the most disturbing thing about his final 24 hours is not what he said. It is what he did not say. He did not express grief. He did not name victims voluntarily. He did not reach out to a single family to offer closure. Every confession he made was a transaction. Information traded for time, for delays, for one more day alive. Even at the very end, Ted Bundy was performing. The crowds outside the prison walls sensed it. The detectives who shook their heads at the Dobson interview sensed it. And the investigators who spent years on the Bundy Project discovered it in the gaps, in the cases he never mentioned, in the victims whose families are still waiting. Some files were never meant to be opened, but we opened them anyway. Ted Bundy was executed 36 years ago. The crowds have gone home, the signs have faded, but 36 years later, new details are still emerging. Families are still waiting, and investigators are still quietly working through the cases of a man who made sure he would never be fully understood. That is what makes him one of the most studied and most dangerous criminals in American history. Not the murders, the control, even over his own ending. If you want to go deeper, next week on The Dark Files, we look at the case that stumped police for 25 years, the Zodiac Killer's final letter, and the theory that changed everything. That video is right here. Subscribe so you don't miss it. These are The Dark Files.